Hello and welcome virtually to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Christopher Sands and I'm director of our Canada Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And I'm very pleased to be welcoming you today for an update on the roadmap for a renewed US-Canada partnership. The roadmap was an initiative of President Joseph Biden and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that came out of their first virtual bilateral meeting back in February of 2021. It outlined an ambitious agenda to improve our cooperation and to deepen it in areas that were top priorities for both governments. No one has a great perspective on the totality of this Canada-US relationship like our ambassadors do. They serve as the team captains on the hockey game of Canada-US relations, pulling the players together, getting visibility on a wide range of our important areas of cooperation. That's why we've turned to our ambassadors today, Ambassador David L. Cohen, U.S. Ambassador to Canada, and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, Canada's Ambassador to the United States, to provide us with an update, a progress report, if you will, on the roadmap 3 years in. And I'm going to turn to you, Ambassador David Cohen, first just to give an opening statement. How do you think we're doing on the roadmap?
Well, thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to the whole team at the Wilson Center, not only for organizing this event, but for consistently shining a spotlight on the roadmap and the tremendous bilateral cooperation and accomplishments that it has spawned. It's a pleasure to be back with you to mark the 3rd anniversary of the roadmap. I also want to thank my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, for joining us today as we meet again to take stock of our progress and look ahead to the future. Kirsten and her embassy team in Washington have been amazing partners in nurturing and growing the bilateral partnership between Canada and the United States that is literally the envy of the world. We began year 3 of the roadmap with President Biden's March 2023 visit to Ottawa. During that visit, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau reaffirmed our historic alliance and steadfast friendship and set the course for our collaboration in 2023 and beyond. We took up that work, recommitting to our shared democratic values, shared security, and shared prosperity. We had a number of accomplishments in year 3. We continued to partner together on the world stage as partners, friends, allies, and neighbors, committed to building a more free, equitable, secure, and prosperous world. Year 3 saw the United States and Canada continuing to support the people of Ukraine in their fight for democracy through security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. Since February 24th, 2022, the United States has provided almost $75 billion in total assistance to Ukraine, including almost $45 billion in arms and military equipment. That is more assistance than all the other countries in the coalition that has been created to support Ukraine combined. And notwithstanding some noise and messiness in our Congress, democracy is not always the prettiest form of government. There remains strong bipartisan support for aid to Ukraine, and we will deliver on our commitment to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. In 2023, our defense partnership extended to the Red Sea, where we joined allies and partners, again, including Canada, to defend lives and protect the free flow of commerce in the face of Houthi attacks against transiting vessels, including commercial shipping. And here in North America, the United States and Canada have continued to invest in our collective security. We have closely collaborated on our shared NORAD modernization projects, including the lead priority of building the next generation over-the-horizon radar system. We remain focused on ensuring that our forces remain interoperable, even interchangeable in the defense of North America, thanks to a series of efficient and well-decided defense procurement decisions by Canada that resulted in the purchases of 140 aircraft at a total cost of $44 billion, including F-35 future fighters and the state-of-the-art P8 maritime surveillance platform. These decisions were good for our bilateral continental defense efforts, and they were good for Canadians with strong domestic economic benefits deriving from those procurements. In year 3 of the roadmap, we also expanded our work to combat COVID-19 to encompass overall health security. We continued to collaborate closely on shared health challenges, including planning for future pandemics. We also made real progress in building back better following the COVID-19 pandemic. Canada remained the United States' top trading partner in 2023. In the latest data released just last week, the Commerce Department reported that a truly incredible $2.5 billion US dollars, almost 3.4 billion Canadian dollars in goods and services crossed our shared border each day and generated or supported millions of jobs in both of our countries. And 35 states in the United States report that Canada is their top trading partner as well. We maintained our focus on economic inclusion to ensure that everyone benefits from the recovery, including small and medium-sized enterprises, especially those owned by women, people of color, Indigenous peoples, and other underrepresented groups, emphasizing the better in Build Back Better, second pillar in the roadmap. As part of that effort, we launched a series of living room conversations with entrepreneurs and small business leaders, diverse underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, and Indigenous business owners, to facilitate information sharing and strengthen networks. DEIA continued to inform everything that we do in Mission Canada. We welcomed U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland to Canada, with 3 Canadian cabinet ministers involved, and increased our engagement with Indigenous leaders. We hosted National Urban League President Marc Morial in Ottawa and Halifax, along with Peter Flegel, Executive Director of Canada's Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat, spurring partnerships between Black civil society organizations in the United States and Canada. In Vancouver, we held the inaugural Chinatown Solidarity Conference along with Minister Mary Ng, bringing together 50 leaders from 17 Chinatowns throughout Canada and the United States to focus on supporting minority-owned SMEs and entrepreneurs, preserving and revitalizing Chinatowns, and enhancing public safety for Asian American and Asian Canadian communities. Along with multiple Canadian cabinet ministers, we supported gender equity in sports, joining our Canadian friends, including the Prime Minister and the Mayor of Ottawa, to celebrate the establishment of the new Professional Women's Hockey League and its inaugural season. And we harnessed the power of sports to drive change in our communities. Along with Ambassador Hillman and the Canadian Embassy, we led a 170-person diplomatic mission with the Ottawa Capital City Condors adaptive hockey program to my hometown of Philadelphia in January for matches with the Snyder Foundation's hockey program for underprivileged youth. As part of that program, our respective embassy hockey teams, without either ambassador on the ice, met for some sports diplomacy at the first Ambassadors Cup Challenge. I'll take this opportunity to again congratulate the Canadian team on their win, noting, however, that most of the players on Canada's team had been playing hockey for their entire lives, and say that I look forward to a rematch. Lastly, let me say a word about what we are doing on energy and critical minerals. We've made investments involving major U.S. auto manufacturers in EV battery manufacturing in Canada and critical minerals mining projects, coupled with private sector investors and companies. This collaboration is paving the way for a secure, clean supply chain that will bring climate and business benefits to both of our countries for decades to come. These are just some of our accomplishments over the last year. Take a breath, because it's been a busy and productive year, and we're already looking ahead to year 4, continuing to defend democratic values as founding members of NATO, marking its 75th anniversary this year, moving forward on NORAD modernization and our engagement in the Arctic, working toward a modernized Columbia River Treaty, and continuing efforts to protect our shared waters from pollution, and maintaining our focus on promoting small and medium-sized enterprises with an emphasis on those owned by diverse, underrepresented groups. So I want to close with a quote from President Biden from his visit to Ottawa in March 2023. He said, "Canada and the United States can do big things. We stand together, do them together, rise together. We're going to write the future together, I promise you." And it's that word together that I think defines our relationship and calls out its success. That relationship is truly unlike any other in the world, and our accomplishments together this year have strengthened the foundation of our partnership and set us up for continued progress on the shared interests of our two countries. I look forward to discussing more of this during our conversation, and I'm happy to turn the floor over to my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Hillman. Kirsten?
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Ambassador Cohen, for that really comprehensive and exciting presentation about all the things we're doing. I always like these moments where we stop and we look back, and then you think, oh, that's why I'm feeling a little tired, because we've been up to a lot lately. And I want to say thanks to you, Chris, for convening us, and thanks to the Wilson Center always for their huge support. So I'm going to take it up a bit of a notch in my opening comments, because I know we're going to dig into some of the very specifics that Ambassador Cohen reflected on in his opening remarks. So when we crafted the roadmap back in 2021, we were in a moment of just coming out of COVID. We were in a moment, well, not even, we were still combating COVID, actually. The USMCA, the CUSMA, had just entered into force. Supply chains were disrupted. We were really not back to sort of a normal economic or social life in any way that we had been used to. And if we look at where we are today, I think it's fair to say that some of those challenges have dissipated, not all of them, but some of them have dissipated. Some of them persist. And we have new challenges that are facing us as partners, and in particular as partners in the context of a global environment that is incredibly disrupted and challenging. And so I would say, the sort of theme around the roadmap when it was created was, here are two countries, here are two governments in particular, a government and administration, that have a lot of shared values, a lot of shared goals, who understand that we can do really great things together, as the president's quote that Ambassador Cohen cited demonstrates. And so let's articulate all of that. In my view, that has only increased in the past few years. Our need to work together in the face of the challenges that are disrupting our societies internally, and the challenges that the global environment is putting on our economies, our security, our resilience, is only greater than it was in 2021. So I think that, one of the things that I say often here in Washington is that we are, two countries that share a 5,000 mile, almost 5,500 miles, almost 9,000 kilometer border. It is a border that is safe and secure, and is the core of our prosperity, our friendship, our collaboration. there are many countries around this world right now that have neighbors that do not contribute to their security, their prosperity, their safety. There are many countries, sadly, in this world whose neighbors wish them ill and who spend a lot of time and resources managing the fact that the geographic environment in which they find themselves requires an awful lot of attention, and not in a good way. So I think it's really important for us to stop and take account of that, not just here in Washington, not just in Ottawa, but across the entire country in the United States and in Canada, for the millions of Canadians and Americans who work together every single day, whether it's in business, whether it's our researchers, whether it's our law enforcement, our militaries, families, right? I was in Florida, and that was really incredible because I got the statistics on how many Canadians live in Florida full-time or part-time and how much they contribute to sort of the society there. We are family, right? As people know. And I think sometimes when things are going well, we tend to take them a little bit too much for granted. And that's true in international relations, but it's true in everyone's own lives. And if I have one message for today, thinking about where we've come from the roadmap, where we need to be going, it's let's take, 5% of the time that we spend on things that are a challenge and put it towards things that are going well and re-emphasize and re-strengthen those things. And again, not just the federal governments. This is an issue for governors and premiers and mayors and business and academics and researchers. I've been to Ohio, Illinois, New York, Arizona, California, Alaska, Florida, Michigan in the past couple of months. And very intentionally to meet with communities that have a huge tie with Canada, but maybe don't always fully recognize that on a day-to-day basis. And anyone who follows David on social media knows that he's crossing the country of Canada in all sorts of communities, big and small, all day long or all week long. And I think that that's something that the two of us really have in common and are really focusing on. It's great that our federal governments get along well, that our leaders have a really great relationship, that our cabinet members at the federal level have very strong and solid relationships. But, the core, and those, and I don't mean to diminish those at all, they're very important, obviously very important. But I actually think that the foundation of the strength and enduring resilience of our relationship and the benefit that it brings to our society is actually, frankly, built upon the foundation of these millions and millions of Canadians and Americans that are doing stuff together every day. And so I think that it's worthwhile for us to kind of highlight that for us, for them, for both of our countries, all the time. So we're working on that, and David's working on that too. Recently, we had a trip to Toronto, Windsor, and Detroit. Myself, Mary Ng, Minister Ng, and Minister Champagne. We have been tasked by the Prime Minister to sort of, in a very deliberate way, continue this outreach locally, both in Canada and the United States, highlighting all of the strengths of the Canada-US relationship, but also listening to folks about what more we could be doing. And we are seeing here in DC in Congress the same attitude being taken among lawmakers with the creation of the I want to get this right, American Canadian Economic and Security Caucus, the ACES caucus, which is a bicameral and a bipartisan caucus, one of very few, one of like 4, I think, that has close to 60 members, I think 59 members, completely bipartisan. It's like 50-50 or 49-50 in terms of representatives. And they're not just from border states. There are members of that caucus from Arkansas and from obviously Florida and Texas and Mississippi. And I think that's really, really important because everything that sort of leads to the strength of our relationship, lots of it happens at the border, but lots of it happens all over the country. So I would just say that I think that the roadmap, which we're going to dig into, is a really important frame for what we're doing. And it continues to highlight the categories of activity that are very important to both of our countries. But it's important to make it real for communities and for them to understand what this relationship means to them. And it's important for us to understand that we're a source of resilience, economic security, prosperity, and national security for each other. So maybe I'll stop there. Thanks, Chris.
That's wonderful. Thank you, both ambassadors, for giving us that overview. I want to remind all of our viewers, if you're watching this live, there's a box that you'll see on the page that you're viewing this on where you can enter in questions. Those questions will get to me, and I'll try to get to all the audience questions that we have a little bit later in the broadcast. But I want to start with a question for both ambassadors, kind of digging out of something that you both talked about, and that is really the Build Back Better agenda. Back in February 2021, that was the tagline for President Biden's legislative proposals following the pandemic. And the Canadian government had a very similar set of investments, same reason, get the economy going again after COVID. Let me start with you, Ambassador Cohen. You mentioned that there was a real focus within that package on small and medium-sized businesses, and particularly those owned by women, racialized minorities, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. Can you, picking up, I think, on something Ambassador Hillman said, can you flesh that out a little bit? And what have we achieved so far in those areas?
So this issue is a particular passion of mine. As you say, it's part of the Build Back Better pillar, but it's also part of the diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility pillar. And as I said, this is a particular passion of mine. Really starts from the reality that if you look at the pandemic, and as Ambassador Hillman said, it wasn't that long ago that we were really both countries were in the grips of the pandemic, and coming back from the pandemic was a central feature of the roadmap. And I think it's important that if you will, the economic pillar of the roadmap was not to build back. It was to build back better. I'm a lawyer by training. I never get rid of it, but I was always taught that words matter. And there was a reason why the word better was included in building back, because we didn't want to just build the economy back to where it was. We wanted to build it back to where it was better. We wanted to make sure we didn't leave small and medium-sized businesses who often bore the brunt of the economic injury from the pandemic. We didn't want to leave them behind. We wanted to make sure they were included. And in particular, we wanted to make sure that SMEs owned by women, people of color, Indigenous peoples, and other underrepresented groups benefited from the economic recovery that we were generating. Now, it's a matter of equity. It's a matter of our core values, the Prime Minister's core values, the President's core values, but it's also just smart business. I mean, let's remember that in both the United States and Canada, SMEs make up like 99% of our businesses. So it's the old joke about when Willie Sutton kept getting arrested for robbing federal banks, where there was a much larger prison term than robbing a state savings and loan. He said, well, why do you keep robbing federal banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. So why are we so fixated and focused on small, medium-sized enterprises? Because that's where the jobs are. And if you're going to recover, you want to go to where the jobs are. And I talked in my remarks about these salon conversations that I've been able to have all around Canada. And I've met now with, I think, several hundred diverse entrepreneurs who found and own SMEs, listen to their issues, their problems. They've identified a pretty common issue set, which can get folded into US and Canadian policy for supporting their revitalization and their growth. And just to be granular about it, I want to just mention two specific examples of success stories that really arose out of this. One example is a company called Fan Saves, which is an Ontario-based, woman-owned startup company that's in the supplementary marketing of sports teams and sports arenas. You sign up online, and then the team or the arena can run a promotion. Let's say if the team wins and the company has signed up all sorts of advertisers of, if you score at least 3 goals, you get a free Big Mac at McDonald's. And so they can promote that to their fans. It's sort of an add-on to their season tickets. So the co-founder and CEO of that company is a graduate of the State Department's Young Leaders of the Americas initiative. So we knew her from a State Department program. She engaged in a couple of our salon discussions. We provided some mentoring and support for her business. Part of that was to suggest to her that she look at what has become an acclaimed sports accelerator program, happens to be sponsored by Comcast, NBC Universal, my former company. We promoted her to that accelerator, and she and her company were one of a dozen companies selected to participate in the accelerator out of hundreds of applicants. And out of that participation, she left the United States with a sponsorship from NASCAR for her company, which is sort of the crown jewel of sponsorships. And she would be the first person to say she wouldn't even know how to meet NASCAR without that introduction, without that program. My second example is Montreal-based Haitian-Canadian entrepreneur by the name of Stephanie Zoucroix. She's provided mentorship and training for almost 7,000 individuals in Quebec, thanks in part to a grant last year from our embassy, which really helped to get her enterprise up and running. She was just recognized as a promising leader and selected to participate in the State Department's International Visitors Leadership Program. She founded her organization, which is called Technovation Montreal, after visiting the California-based Technovation facility during her 3-week visit to the United States. Today, through Technovation Montreal, she's encouraging girls aged 14 to 18 to pursue careers in STEM and to join the video game and app development sectors. So these are just 2 diverse, female, successful Canadian women entrepreneurs who have benefited from the institutionalized structure that we've created to promote small and medium-sized enterprises, especially those with diverse founders and diverse owners.
That's fantastic, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Ambassador Hillman, we have a question from our viewing audience that kind of builds on that, asking about what we've been doing under the roadmap on critical minerals and energy projects and how that's affected our industrial relationships, also in particular EV battery manufacture.
Thanks very much. Great question. So let me maybe talk in terms of a bit of a trajectory. In 2020, in the context of COVID and assessing all of our critical supply chains, right, and strategic vulnerabilities, whether it be energy or food or pharmaceuticals, PPE, during the context of COVID, our country and the United States, and probably most countries around the world, were doing this assessment or living the consequences, frankly, of supply chain disruption and strategic vulnerabilities that we had for certain goods. So in 2020, Canada and the US initiated a joint action plan on critical minerals. Then in 2023, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau sort of doubled down on that cooperation by articulating very specific projects and announcing plans to invest jointly in strategic projects in our 2 countries. And now that cooperation is really bearing fruit and will continue over the next years to do so because of this coordination and sort of cooperation and a bit of a gap analysis and what can we do together to be resilient, not just individually as a country, but together. And the reason why together makes sense, it always makes sense for Canada and the US, but specifically in this sector, why this makes sense is Canada produces over 60 minerals and metals, including 19, which is roughly 2/3 of the minerals that the United States lists as critical. And we are the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has all of the minerals that are required for the manufacture of EV batteries. So this puts us in a really important position domestically, but obviously it puts us in a really important position with the United States working together. So earlier this year, in fact, for the first time, Canada surpassed China in an assessment that Bloomberg does of the lithium-ion battery supplies. And it ranks 30 countries based on potential for a robust lithium-ion battery supply chain. China's always been number one. And this year, for the first time, Canada surpassed China, and the United States is number 3, which I think is also very important to the context of this question that was asked. Ultimately, the strength of both Canada and the United States in this regard is sort of policy commitment, secure and reliable funding, and secure and reliable policy orientation. For us, abundant resources, a lot of clean resources. So a lot of the manufacturing that we can do can be based on green electricity and other renewable sources. Prioritizing in our federal expenditures those specific minerals that are required for battery production. And this has essentially led to a further emphasis, I guess, and further attention to all of the activity that's already happening in Canada and has been about over the last 18 months or so. Generational investments in battery manufacturing plants, mega plants, generational investment, frankly, from extraction to recycling. And I don't think it's going to abate. Like, I say generational, but if we have this conversation again next year, I'll say it's even better. There's, based on right now in Washington, there's a summit on critical minerals happening over the next couple of days. And so a lot of mining companies, small and large, are here in town. And the energy and excitement around potential is great. And I guess just a couple more things that I would say on this. I think that it's really important for our country to emphasize the fact that we are deeply devoted to fighting climate change, to decarbonizing, to ensuring that we are leaving the planet better for our children than it is today. But at the same time, Canada is also a proud mining country. And we believe that actually what we bring to the international table and what we bring to the Canada-US partnership is leadership in standards, leadership in practices that we have for the way in which we extract, the way in which we work with communities, and the fact that we recognize that this particular activity is essential. It's essential for the energy transition. It's essential for our national security, for advanced technologies, and we want to be, the leader, frankly, together with our American friends in doing this the right way. So we're super excited about it, and I actually think it's only the beginning. Like, I think that honestly, it's only the beginning of a North American powerhouse for battery technology and transformation of our auto sector, which is, as everybody knows, the largest manufacturing sector for both our countries. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, if I could
Please.
just build off of that last comment, because I think it's so important. And Ambassador Hillman really makes the point, if you will. She talks about energy security. One of the issues here is the dominant place that China in particular, but China and Russia plays in the critical mineral space, not only extraction and control of the minerals, but refining and processing. And for us to make the dent that we're making, and that Ambassador Hillman talked about, we're going to have to compete with an entrenched Chinese position against a country that doesn't care that much about the corporate social responsibility and environmental social responsibility that Ambassador Hillman was talking about. And this is one of the major reasons for the incentive programs that exist on both sides of the border. I get tired of reading in Canadian press in particular, some of the criticism of Canadian incentive programs as being corporate welfare, even though they are passionately in favor of Canada competing in this space and not having a race to the bottom in terms of the environmental standards. And I also note that there was all this concern about the United States incentive programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, in part because of the size of the programs. And we said at the time, and I do think we're delivering, that the purpose of those programs is not to compete with Canada. It is to help accelerate the extraction, refining, processing, and manufacturing of critical minerals to accomplish the objectives that Ambassador Hillman laid out. And the cooperation that exists and that is growing every day between Canada and the United States, as Canada uses its incentive programs and we use our incentive programs, and we work together on projects, sometimes the same project, sometimes different projects in the same space. And we're beginning to make a difference. And again, just for specifics, there are two companies. So graphite happens to be a critical mineral that's plentiful in the United States. And there are two specific prominent examples of Canadian companies which were of interest to Canada who have US-based projects, Graphite One in Alaska, and South Star Battery Metals in Alabama, both of which received United States government incentive payments to stimulate their growth and their development. Canadian companies, they're not US companies, getting the US subsidies as part of this integrated, collaborative critical minerals strategy to generate North American produced graphite with appropriate corporate social responsibility protections built in to compete against China in that particular space.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have a question from someone named Darren, only a first name given, about the pillar on accelerating climate ambitions. And Darren asks, between Canada and the United States, what are the areas in which we've been able to align? And are there areas in climate policy where we are divergent or seeing some gaps in our alignment as we try to raise the bar overall, not only for North America, but globally? And I'm open to either ambassador jumping in on that first. Ambassador Cohen?
I have a short answer, Ambassador,
Please.
if you want, which is, I can't think of a place where we're not aligned. I think our climate ambitions are perfectly aligned. We have comparable standards for getting to net zero. Again, we work together on these issues. And there may be some geographic differences in both of our countries. There may be certain places in both of our countries where there's more interest in making sure that we take care of the fossil fuel industry. But even in Alberta, hypothetically speaking, there's an acknowledgement that we have to move toward a net zero climate, and there's work being done to make the fossil fuels that are generated in Western Canada as green as possible. So I just think this is a place where we're completely aligned, working together, and making progress, which is the key. In fact, we are making progress. We also work together on the international stage. So in COP28, it was Canada and the United States that took the lead when it looked like that conference was going to end without any agreement. that actually took the lead in generating some climate change agreements and commitments from COP28.
Ambassador Hillman.
Sure. Let me just mention just a few just specific things that I think are worthwhile. Both Canada and the United States have increased our level of ambition on the nationally determined contribution target. So that is the target that is set under the Paris Agreement towards net zero. For our part, our commitment is by 2030, 40 to 45% below 2005 levels, which is a 50% increase from where we were actually just 3 years ago at the beginning of the roadmap. So, and that, I'll be honest, that increase in commitment comes from a international sort of momentum, if I can put it that way. And the United States and the Biden administration is quite important in its leadership in the context of that international momentum. We are also have both signed on to the U.S.-led Global Methane Pledge, which we signed on to in 2021, and that commits to a collective goal of reducing human-caused methane emissions by at least 30% by 2020. From 2020 by 2030. So in a 10-year period, which is quite impressive. And we actually went further domestically and put methane regulations in place in Canada aimed at reducing methane emissions from oil and gas by at least 75% by 2030 from 2012 levels. So very ambitious targets there. The U.S. also announced recently that it's going to join the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is an initiative of Canada and the UK that pushes countries to phase out the use of unabated coal for their electricity sector by 2030. So that's another area where we're working closely together. That's for developed countries. Developing countries under that pledge have an extra 10 years. And then finally, as Ambassador Cohen was mentioning, at COP28, we worked really hard to do many things together, but one that I think is really important is we worked with both of us in Germany to deliver on a $100 billion annual climate finance target, because these are expensive projects and they're hard enough for developed countries to be able to afford, let alone our developing country friends. So we worked together on that. The goal was set to achieve that level at COP27, and we did it by COP28. So that's no small feat. Thanks.
No.
Oh, sorry. Darren's question about where we're not aligned. Just to speak to that for a second. I think that if I were to say what I think is important going forward is for us as countries that are so deeply economically and industrially aligned to look at the standards that we put in place and the regulations that we put in place at the sort of operational level for things like EVs, for how we are going to set the standards for advanced manufacturing, and just make sure that we're not creating hindrances to business as we are going from the large goals and the investments to the products coming off the line that we want to be adopted widely, right? So that is an area of work that we have to continue to push on, and we are. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Hillman. We have a great audience response. You guys are starting a real conversation here. And there are a couple of questions that relate to the USMCA or CUSMA as they call it in Canada. And the first one is a broad question from an anonymous questioner who says, the roadmap was committed to leveraging the USMCA. How are we to interpret USTR Ambassador Catherine Ty's remarks last week that the whole point of the 2026 review should be to maintain a certain amount of discomfort and uncertainty around trade? I'll piggyback on that, a question from Doug Palmer at Politico, who focuses on one specific question, which is, given that it's been a year since the USMCA ruled on an automotive rule of origin dispute, there doesn't seem to be a sign that the U.S. is accepting that and making changes. Will we see that resolved sometime between now and the 2026 review of the agreement? Either one of you could pick either part of that up.
I probably should go first, Kirsten, right? Seems more connected to our position. So
Sure.
the Ambassador Tai comment is really the easier one. I love the press, but you should always be careful about reading a single reporter's interpretation of any official's commentary on a complicated topic. Bottom line is the United States government believes that CUSMA or USMCA is working quite well. We do think it's the gold standard for trade agreements. I think Ambassador Tai's comments go to the fact that it's not a static agreement, it's dynamic. And look, there should be reflection about how the agreement is working and what it means as you go through the course of the agreement. There was no signal being sent that the United States does not continue to value the benefits of the agreement. I mean, we look at USMCA CUSMA as literally being the cornerstone of our regional economic future. I think it's what all three countries are building their economic future on. Now, that does not mean that we are going to magically agree on every trade issue. Frankly, that's what the agreement's about. It provides a dispute resolution mechanism in the event that we don't agree. And I think, I mean, there are decisions that we don't like. There are decisions that Canada hasn't liked out of USMCA. And it's just too early to sort of declare that USMCA isn't working, because those disputes rise and the decisions that are made are working their way through analysis and working their way through the process. So again, my bottom line is, I do think that agreement, again, is something else that is the envy of the world in terms of the scope of the agreement and the benefit that the agreement has to trade in both countries. And I always am a numbers person. So I look and I say, here's this agreement that applies. And under the terms of that agreement, Canada and the United States are each other's #1 trading partners. And we had $2.5 billion of trade US dollars, almost $3.4 billion of trade in Canadian dollars crossing the border every single day. Something's working to produce that. And I think USMCA and CUSMA is one of the structures and frameworks that enables trade to flourish to the extent that it has.
And Mr. Hillman, I want to get you to jump in on this and to add a little twist. One of our Wilson Fellows, Mexican Ambassador Roberto Lejeune, asks, what lessons would Canada offer for Mexico if it wanted to catch up with a roadmap with the United States of its own? How can Mexico copy some of these ideas? And do you think it's worthwhile for them to try?
Thank you. So on USMCA CUSMA, there is no question that the agreement is working, period. Stable, predictable, transparent, enforceable trade rules lead to investor confidence, lead to business confidence. They lead to this 99% of our economies, as Ambassador Cohen was saying, that are SMEs, feel willing and able to dip their toe into international trade. Companies that trade internationally are more resilient. They tend to pay higher wages. They tend to have more profits. Trade is good for our economies. It's certainly good between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the CUSMA USMCA TMEX is the foundation of that predictability and stability, period. And it's not just sort of rhetoric. Since the entry into force of the revised agreement, Canada-US trade, Canada-Mexico trade, US-Mexico trade, all-time historic high levels, highest in history between our three countries. So it's doing what it's meant to do. And I have to say, you know, there is often a little bit of sort of loose talk around the process that is set out in the agreement. The process that's set out in the agreement is a review of the USMCA. for the three countries to come together and to look at how it's working and to say, okay, these are the kind of goals we set for ourselves. Are they working? Are we getting what we wanted out of this? And to have a really substantive conversation around it. And that's, that's a good thing. And there are agreements that are static, and it's hard to get those conversations going. And it's important to do it because the world changes, as we were talking about earlier. What's happening in our own countries and now what's happening globally has a massive impact on our economic profiles as countries, on the work that we're doing together as countries. When we were negotiating the USMCA, we didn't think that we would be working to be the battery powerhouse and the mining and mineral powerhouse of the world, right? And today we do. So the world changes, we should look at it. But I think it's about stability and predictability. And I think that it's about countries that know that they are deep contributors to each other's prosperity coming to the table with that attitude and thinking about how we can do it better if there are things that aren't working well. But it's not from our perspective, it is working well, and we're looking forward to talking about it. But there's no question, the facts are that it's working well. In terms of a roadmap with the U.S., well, that's a good question. Maybe one better directed at Ambassador Cohen than me, but it's a very good question. I think so. This emerged through a recognition right after President Biden was elected that our government and his administration had some very core and consistent goals domestically and internationally, and that we felt that it would be a very good exercise to lay those out and to lay out how that we would help each other and support each other in achieving those goals, both at home and internationally. And so I would say to Mexico that's the core of it. It's the core of saying, what is that relationship? How is it working well? Where is there work to be done? And then make the case for a framework like that. I think that's terrific. But I'm sure, as I say, it's probably better directed at the U.S. than me. Thanks.
Ambassador Cohen, do you want to jump in on the value of a roadmap and how it might help U.S. relations with Mexico?
Yeah, look, I think Ambassador Hillman said it right. I mean, you need the preconditions to be able to get there. I mean, I think in some ways, informally, we have some of the elements of a roadmap with Mexico already. And I think if you have two countries that share values, that share the desire for more collaborative relationship, and that want to extend their values over a broader set of issues, the roadmap, is just an excellent organizing principle for your work together, if nothing else. But I'm not saying it's just because Ambassador Hillman is on the line. But the relationship between Canada and the United States is unique. It's not unusual, it's unique. The closeness of the relationship, the depth of the relationship, as the ambassador said, it's a relationship around trade and treaties and values, but it's really around people. The people are, I mean, as the ambassador said, couldn't believe how many Canadians were vacationing in Florida. By the way, if you go there in August, you might find a smaller group of Canadians going to Florida for vacation. But it is the strength of the people connections that I think really makes the Canada-US relationship unique, and it is part of what makes the roadmap work. So you can't transplant the roadmap to any bilateral relationship, even if it's a good relationship. And Canada, Mexico, and the United States and Mexico have a good bilateral relationship, but it is not the same as the closeness and the depth of the U.S.-Canada relationship.
Well, Ambassador Cohen, you said that very, very well. I know we're coming very close to time. I'm going to push my luck and ask one question that came from our audience. Lori Trotman, director of the Border Policy Research Institute out at Western Washington University and a global fellow here at the Canada Institute, asks about the border. The border is not an explicit item in the roadmap as it is now, and yet frequently comes up, including during President Biden's visit to Ottawa and his speech to Parliament. How how can the border factor into the roadmap, or maybe even a roadmap 2 if such a thing is being contemplated?
You're going to go first, Ambassador Hellman?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that the border as a geographical spot isn't necessarily in the roadmap per se, but issues that are relevant to what we do at the border are infrastructure, ease of transportation, domestic security, having our people work together on ensuring that it is a safe and resilient partnership and continent. Those are all, the border factors in a way to, you know, many spots within the roadmap. I mean, I think that, I suppose it could be its own item, but on the other hand, there's probably a multitude of things that we could pull out and be, you know, we could, there, just as a matter of fact, there was a point at which we were talking about, should we have a whole section on water, right? Because we have an enormous amount of, between the Great Lakes and just water flows between our two countries, there's an enormous relationship around water security, water energy, water communities, resilience, navigation, trade, security, our coasts, like, right? So you could probably pick out a whole bunch of things, and these were the choices that were made. But it doesn't mean that the border isn't something, obviously, that is front and center from both an economic and a security perspective. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ambassador Hillman said it exactly right. I tend to look at the roadmap almost as a constitutional form of document, that it's drafted in a way that its pillars are sufficiently broad and have enough reach to be able to cover any issue that comes up between the two countries. And I don't think it's helpful or appropriate every time you have an important issue, and the border is an important issue. Water is an important issue, but you shouldn't turn around and amend the roadmap or say, oh, we need a new roadmap because the border isn't one of the pillars under the roadmap. There is ample coverage in at least two pillars that I could think of off the top of my head of the roadmap to cover the border, and that helps to guide our work on the border under the terms and the purview of the roadmap. And I think, just like the United States Constitution, which, you know, was drafted a couple hundred years ago, and somehow it's stood up over time, dealing with issues that weren't even contemplated at the time it was written. I think the roadmap has stood up extremely well, not over a couple hundred years, but over 3 years. And it's proved itself sufficiently flexible and resilient to cover a wide variety of issues that weren't top of mind at the time the roadmap was created. I think that's one of the strengths of the roadmap, and I think we will continue to enjoy the benefits of that elastic document for years to come.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Cohen, Ambassador Hillman. You've given us a little insight into not only the day-to-day, but some of the achievements of the roadmap and where we may be headed. It's a signal part of Canada-US relations, and a nice summation for those people who don't follow Canada-US relations all the time, that a lot of really good work is being done, and you've helped shine a light on that work. So thank you both very, very much. To our viewers, if you have further questions or you're interested in more on the roadmap, keep staying tuned to the Woodrow Wilson Center's Canada Institute. We'll be providing more in the future, and we hope to follow the roadmap until we lead to the end of the road. Well, I don't know if there is an end of the road, but we'll stay on the road with you. Thank you very much, Ambassador David L. Cohen and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, David. Great to see you. Thanks, everyone.